The world watched in nervous anticipation, hearts heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Every headline, every radio broadcast, every whispered conversation seemed to carry the same ominous message. Change was coming, and it would not be gentle. The year was 1939, a year that would be etched into the annals of history as a turning point, a moment when the world stood on the edge of an abyss. Images flickered across cinema screens, grainy black and white newsreels capturing the anxieties of a world teetering on the brink. People gathered around radios, their faces etched with worry as they listened to the latest updates, hoping for good news but bracing for the worst. Military parades showcased growing might, a visible demonstration of force in an increasingly unstable world. The rhythmic march of soldiers, the gleaming weapons, the banners fluttering in the wind, all were designed to send a clear message. Power was shifting, and the balance of the world was about to be upended. Breadlines snaked through city streets, a stark reminder of the economic despair that gripped nations still reeling from the Great War. The Great Depression had left deep scars, and the promise of recovery seemed a distant dream for many. Hunger and poverty were daily realities, and the social fabric was fraying at the edges. And from the ashes of that conflict, a new threat emerged, the rise of totalitarian regimes hungry for power and expansion. Leaders who promised strength and revival, but at the cost of freedom and democracy. Their voices boomed through loudspeakers, their images plastered on posters, their promises of a better future masking the dark reality of their ambitions. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to ensure peace, instead sowed the seeds of resentment and instability. The harsh terms imposed on Germany created a fertile ground for anger and disillusionment, feelings that would be exploited by those seeking to rise to power. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, grew fertile ground for extremist ideologies. The Nazi Party, with its promises of national rejuvenation and its scapegoating of minorities, found a receptive audience among a populace desperate for change. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime promised a return to Roman glory, preying on national pride and economic anxiety. His vision of a new Roman Empire resonated with many Italians who felt humiliated and overlooked on the world stage. And in the heart of Europe, a charismatic demagogue named Adolf Hitler, fueled by a toxic mix of nationalism and hatred, rose to power in Germany, promising to restore his nation to its former greatness. His speeches, filled with vitriol and grandiose visions, captivated a nation yearning for a sense of purpose and direction. The world watched, many hoping against hope that the storm clouds gathering would somehow dissipate, but the signs were clear and the tension was palpable. Conversations in cafes, discussions in parliament halls, and debates in the press all revolved around the same question. Could war be averted? But the storm was coming, a conflict so vast, so devastating, that it would forever change the course of human history. Military preparations intensified, and the skies over European cities grew increasingly ominous. The world was on the precipice, and the descent into chaos seemed inevitable. On September 1st, 1939, the world held its breath as Hitler's forces stormed across the Polish border, shattering the fragile peace and unleashing the horrors of World War II. The invasion of Poland marked the beginning of a conflict that would engulf the globe, bringing unprecedented destruction and reshaping the world order in ways that are still felt today. The roots of the Second World War ran deep, entwined with the unresolved tensions and bitter legacies of the First. The echoes of the Great War reverberated through the corridors of power and the hearts of nations, leaving a world struggling to find its footing amidst the ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to prevent future conflicts, instead created a breeding ground for resentment and instability. The harsh terms imposed on Germany were seen as a humiliation, a wound that festered and grew more painful with each passing year. The treaty's architects hoped to secure lasting peace, but their efforts only sowed the seeds of future discord. Germany, humiliated by the terms of the treaty, faced staggering reparations payments and the loss of significant territory. The once proud nation found itself crippled economically and territorially, its people burdened by a sense of injustice and betrayal. The reparations demanded were not just financial, but also psychological, stripping Germany of its dignity and pride. Economic depression gripped the nation, fueling anger and desperation among the population. The global economic downturn of the 1930s hit Germany particularly hard, exacerbating the already dire situation. Breadlines and unemployment became common sights, and the despair of the people grew deeper. Factories closed, families struggled to survive, and the social fabric of the nation began to unravel. Into this maelstrom stepped Adolf Hitler, a charismatic and ruthless leader who offered scapegoats and promises of national revival. Hitler's rhetoric was filled with promises of a return to greatness, of reclaiming lost glory, and of punishing those he blamed for Germany's woes. His speeches resonated with a populace desperate for hope and direction. Hitler's Nazi Party, espousing a poisonous ideology of racial superiority and territorial expansion, found a receptive audience in a nation desperate for change. The Nazi propaganda machine worked tirelessly to spread their message, using every available medium to reach the masses. Posters, rallies, and speeches all served to indoctrinate the German people with the ideals of the Third Reich. Exploiting economic hardship and national pride, Hitler skillfully manipulated the anxieties of the German people, gradually consolidating his power and transforming Germany into a totalitarian state. His rise to power was marked by a series of calculated moves, each designed to eliminate opposition and centralize control. By the time the world realized the extent of his ambitions, it was too late to stop the momentum he had built. Across Europe, similar forces were at play. The continent was a tinderbox, with various nations grappling with their own economic and political crises. The rise of authoritarian regimes was not confined to Germany alone. It was a phenomenon that spread like wildfire, fueled by the same discontent and desire for change. In Italy, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime glorified militarism and national unity, seeking to restore the glories of the Roman Empire. Mussolini's vision of a new Roman Empire resonated with many Italians who longed for a return to past greatness. His regime emphasized strength, discipline, and the subjugation of individual freedoms for the sake of national unity. In Japan, ultra-nationalist sentiment flourished, driven by a desire for expansion and resentment over Western colonialism. The Japanese military sought to assert its dominance in Asia, driven by a belief in their cultural and racial superiority. This expansionist agenda was fueled by a deep-seated resentment of Western powers and their colonial empires. The world, still recovering from the devastation of the Great War, seemed poised on a knife's edge, teetering towards a precipice that promised even greater darkness and destruction. The memories of the trenches and the loss of a generation were still fresh, yet the world seemed unable to avoid the path to another catastrophic conflict. The stage was set for a new and even more devastating war, one that would engulf the globe and reshape the course of history. The rise of totalitarian regimes cast a long shadow across Europe in the years leading up to World War II. These regimes, driven by ideologies of absolute control and domination, reshaped the political landscape of the continent, leaving a legacy of fear and oppression that would be felt for generations. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi Party, with its chilling ideology of Aryan supremacy and racial purity, systematically dismantled democratic institutions and imposed its will on the nation. The Nazis exploited economic turmoil and social unrest to gain support, promising a return to national greatness while scapegoating minorities and political opponents. Political opponents were silenced, imprisoned, or murdered. The regime's ruthless tactics ensured that dissent was crushed swiftly and brutally, creating an atmosphere of terror that stifled any form of resistance. Propaganda and censorship poisoned public discourse, creating an atmosphere of fear and conformity. The Nazis controlled the media, education, and culture, using them as tools to indoctrinate the population and eliminate any ideas that challenged their authority. Across the continent, other dictatorships consolidated their grip on power. In Italy, Mussolini's fascist regime sought to revive the glory of the Roman Empire using violence and propaganda to maintain control. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Stalin's brutal policies reshaped society through fear and repression. Stalin's Soviet Union, driven by a brutal ideology of communist totalitarianism, eliminated opposition through purges, show trials, and forced labor camps. The regime's paranoia led to the execution and imprisonment of millions, including many of its own citizens, who were deemed enemies of the state. Millions perished in the Soviet gulags, victims of a regime that valued ideology above human life. The suffering endured in these camps was a stark reminder of the human cost of totalitarian rule. In Italy, Mussolini's fascist government suppressed dissent, glorified violence, and sought to create a corporatist state under the control of the ruling party. The regime's aggressive nationalism and militarism further destabilized the region, contributing to the growing tensions in Europe. The rise of these totalitarian regimes represented a profound crisis for democracy and human rights. The suppression of free speech, the persecution of minorities, and the erosion of civil liberties were hallmarks of these oppressive governments. Fueled by ideologies of hatred, intolerance, and expansionism, these regimes posed a grave threat to international peace and stability. Their aggressive foreign policies and territorial ambitions set the stage for a conflict that would engulf the world. As the world watched with growing alarm, the stage was set for a conflict that would test the very foundations of civilization. The actions of these totalitarian regimes would lead to a war of unprecedented scale and devastation, challenging the resilience and resolve of nations and individuals alike.